So today we're going to be looking at the Gherkin. I've got to be honest about this one. I'm a big fan of the Gherkin. Norman Foster was the architect behind it. I really like Foster's work. I like how he approaches it. I like the outcomes. And I just thought that the Gherkin was a really interesting approach to a tower. It's just so different from the things around it. It kind of kickstarted that weird thing in London where every building had to have a daft name as well. There's the Gherkin, there's the cheese grater, you've got the walkie-talkie, you've got the can of ham. You know, there's all those other buildings that have all developed and had to have a daft name behind them. But the Gherkin was the one that really stood out. It was the one that was actually, it was just a super interesting building, and rather than just a new tower with an interesting name, it justified it in the kind of innovation, how they approached it, just how it worked and functioned. So the Gherkin's just its nickname, it's what everyone calls it. Before that, it was often referred to by its original owner, which was Swiss Re Insurance, so it was called the Swiss Re Tower. And I think now it's known more by, well, the Gherkin, but also its address, which is 30 St Mary's Axe. What's interesting, I suppose, about the Gherkin is it's cylindrical, but it widens in the centre and then narrows towards the top of the tower as well. So it's quite a bulbous shape, but you've got round floor plates, which is unusual. You've then got cutouts, so it looks from the outside, that looks almost like a spiral. And what you've got is you've got these cutouts that have open space, winter garden, also natural ventilation. So you've got that spiral effect of air around the building. So as it heats, you get fresh air drawn through it rather than just big ducts. And then it's also got a kind of external structural form called a diagrid. So it's based on diamonds and triangle shapes, and that creates the whole outside of the space. Now, we see them quite a lot now on towers, but typically they are on rectangular plans. Because when you get to the top and you've got a point and you're trying to join a diagrid in, so it actually joins in a central lens at the very top, so there's a kind of oculus right on the top of the tower, which is above the restaurant space, which you can go to, and the whole thing just kind of hangs from there. It's beautifully pulled together. It's a really interesting, so it looks almost like a net across the outside of the building, but that's the main structural element. It's a funny thing to look at now because when it was built, it was the first tower in that specific cluster. So it sat on its own, it looked really different, it almost looked like it was kind of piercing its way through the earth and into the skyline. But even in the last few years now, there's so many new ones. The cheese grater or Leyden Hall building that Roger Stuck and Harbour did, just on the other side of the street. It again adds a bit of interest. You start to read them together. And again, it's got a vertical side and then a steeply sloping side. So you start to read them together and then the other buildings falling in around it. So the skyline around it's changed so much that it's actually one of the shorter ones in that area. It's not as tall as it appeared initially, but it's probably, I think, still one of the most interesting. I think I said at the start, didn't I? I'm a massive fan of Foster's work and the studio's work in general. I think his motto is something like change is the only constant. There is something about that, you know, you can tell a Foster building, but part of it is because they don't all look alike, but they've all got an element of innovation, there's an element of change, there's a push in it. There's often a lot of grey as well because they tend to have Foster grey as their primary colour in most places. But there's something really interesting, I think, about a style that's defined by innovation and push, rather than simply defined by an aesthetic. I mean, there's similarities in that they started as a kind of very high-tech studio. That's starting to soften a bit now, and you start to see a much bigger push towards sustainability from them, which I think is a really interesting thing to incorporate, and how they manage that and how they bring that in. A lot more buildings recently with timber, which they're still clearly Foster buildings, but they are very different from these super high-tech glass and steel structures.
Would you have done anything differently?
If I'm honest, I don't think I would have come up with this one. I think the pool of people who would have started with let's make a Gherkin-shaped tower is pretty small. I think when you get into the idea of a traditional tower that's been cut away or shaped differently, or, you know, interesting cladding treatments or finishes, you maybe get, or facades, you get quite a large group of people who might do that kind of work. But on these, when you're looking at things that are based on the fluid dynamics of how wind blows around a tower and heat spirals and things like that, it's not where most of us start. And I think that's, again, the Shard, some of those other kind of buildings that just look so different from a lot of their contemporaries. I think that's what's really interesting about them. Building anything that curves in one dimension is challenging. Do you curve the glass? Do you curve the structure? And if you don't curve it, it facets, and if it facets, it never looks as good. So building anything curved is challenging. Occupying anything curved is challenging as well, because furniture tends not to be curved. People tend to like desks that aren't curvy as well, so you get into some challenges, obviously. Walls don't curve often is part of the challenge too. The thing with the Gherkin is it curves in more than one direction at the same time. So it curves on the horizontal, but it curves vertically as well. So actually that's where you can only really do that if you understand things like a diagrid and how that works, where you start to get the interplay of triangles, and that allows you to curve and bend, but keep the structural integrity. So I think that, again, is why it's so interesting.